You wake slowly, not with the sudden shock of an alarm or a bell, but to the sheer accumulation of subtle shifts. The edges of the previous sleep lift gently, like damp cloth pulled back from a surface. Your awareness gathers itself without effort, anchored by sensation rather than memory. The first thing you register is temperature. It is cool, carrying the faint sharpness of dew-damp earth even here, within the confines of your bedding. You sense the rough straw beneath you, interwoven with whatever woolen covering has been laid out for the temporary camp. It holds a scent, a deep mix of sweat, cured animal hide, and the mustiness of confined bodies overlaid by something cleaner, wood smoke that lingers and fades in equal measure. Slowly, you let your body adjust to the gravity of this new place, this transitory settlement. The pre-dawn light is not bright. It is simply a refusal to be dark anymore. It spreads thinly through the gaps in the canvas flaps overhead, illuminating motes of dust suspended in the cool air. You watch these floating specks for a long moment, mesmerized by their slow, random descent, understanding them as particles that had nowhere else to go but into this filtered light. The world outside is muted. There are no shouted greetings or brisk commands, yet only the soft, rhythmic breathing of those sleeping around you, a steady group inhalation and exhalation that provides a surprisingly profound sense of collective quiet. You notice the geometry of your encampment. Rough wooden supports hold up the tents, creating straight lines and acute angles against the curved horizon. The camp is functional, temporary architecture designed for necessary waiting. A stillness settles over you, inviting observation rather than movement. You might consider the small details. The stain on the earth just outside your sleeping area, left by a boot heel. The way condensation has beaded upon the metal hook holding up the tent flap. The quality of the silence itself, which is not truly empty but full of unheard sounds. The distant murmur of a brook, perhaps, or the rustle of unseen night creatures in the outer fields. Your muscles feel heavy with sleep, accustomed to the simple routine of home and hearth, and this required discipline feels slightly foreign. You draw one breath deeply, pulling the cool air into your lungs until it reaches a point of satisfying coolness, noticing how the taste of the early morning lingers faintly on your tongue. When you finally begin to stir, the movement is minimal, cautious. You lift an arm, feeling the slight stiffness in the joints that accompanies a long night spent lying still. The movements are deliberate. There is no haste required. You examine your own hands for any signs of fatigue or injury, noting the calluses and ingrained dirt that speak of work done and life lived. They feel solid, capable, yet also marginally out of place within this context of enforced waiting. You push yourself up onto your elbows, allowing gravity to guide you slowly into a sitting position. The rush of blood to your head is not dramatic, but perceptible. A slow thrumming beneath the skin that connects you back to immediate awareness. The awakening routine of a man who has left his familiar cottage behind is marked by small acts of physical preparedness. You reach out and feel the bedding once more, gathering the edges of the rough straw into your lap, straightening the lines where they had slumped overnight. You might adjust your tunic or belt, finding the simple textures, rough spun linen against skin, the hardness of worn leather straps, to be anchors to reality. The clothing itself feels less like proper attire and more like serviceable wrapping for an unfamiliar life chapter. You slide your bare feet onto the ground just outside the tent's opening. The cold hits you instantly, a clean, invigorating shock that makes you subtly curl your toes. This chill is different from the comforting coolness of morning dew on grass. It is the elemental cold of packed earth, smelling of minerals and damp leaf litter. You stand there for a breath-held moment, letting the temperature gradient wash over your ankles, feeling the difference between the wood supports of the camp and the natural ground beneath them. It grounds you, separating the artificial temporary space from the timeless reality of the soil. The village itself is still mostly contained in this perimeter of sound. You can now register certain sounds that were muffled moments before. A distant clanging of metal, perhaps buckets being dropped. A lowing sound, suggesting livestock waking up, and the more distinct sound of rough voices beginning to stir further afield. These noises are not directed at you, nor do they suggest immediate action, but rather the steady return of routine life attempting to ignore your presence. They establish a background current against which your own existence in this military camp remains subtly suspended. You begin the slow process of gathering your necessary gear. This is not an urgent search. It is methodical and ritualistic. You check the fastenings on your belt, ensuring that the small tools or personal items attached are secure. A knife sheath, a whetstone, perhaps a water skin whose leather has creased with age. Every piece of equipment carries a history of its own. The wood grain of a haft polished by countless hands, the darkened patina on metal points from previous uses. You trace these familiar textures with your fingertips, finding small connections to lives beyond this present waiting period. Observing others beginning their day offers further context. A woman might be seen carrying an empty wooden pail towards a shared well, her movements economical and practiced, years of hauling water having shaped the grace of her stride. Further away, you notice smoke rising in uneven plumes from small hearths, the first fires of the day being coaxed back to life with careful sticks. The air thickens momentarily with the sweet, sharp smell of burning oak mixed with wood smoke that has been banked all night. These are moments where the sheer resilience of human domesticity asserts itself, existing parallel to your unusual gathering here. As you finally stand ready, fully clothed, and having taken a few necessary breaths, you look outward again. The sun has not yet cleared the distant rise of the hills, but its influence is undeniable. It softens the hard edges of everything, turning the drab earth tones into muted shades of ochre and deep brown. You understand that the purpose of this slow awakening, the methodical preparation for something uncertain, is to instill a sense of order. The world demands a rhythm, whether through farming cycles, market days, or now, military waiting. This careful slowness is your first lesson in enduring an unexpected form of disciplined existence. You move away from the immediate concentration of sleeping men and walk toward the edge of the temporary grouping. Your steps are measured. You observe the ground underfoot, a mixture of compacted dirt, scattered gravel, and the occasional patch of resistant scrub grass that manages to survive close quarters. The weight and texture of the boot sole pressing into the earth is a physical reminder of your position. You are mobile, meant for movement, even if that movement is only yet conceptualized. The sheer expanse of open sky above you is overwhelming in its vastness and quiet indifference. It seems to hold up the very day, making it feel both endless and fleeting. You pause just long enough at this edge to let your senses catalog the environment. The cool weight of the air against your cheek, the distant scent of pine sap mixing with the immediate smell of camp cooking fires, the profound lack of defining features that suggests an open operational space. You carry this quiet inventory within you, preparing the necessary mental quietude for what lies ahead. The cool air retains the damp memory of last night's chill, a faint scent mixed with wood smoke, and the deep, earthy smell of upturned soil. You rise slowly, pulling your boots onto your feet. The leather creaks softly in the quiet morning air, a sound almost swallowed by the low hum of awakening village life nearby. The sky is still that muted gray-blue of pre-dawn, only lightening gradually where it meets the distant roofs of your home community. Movement comes hesitantly at first, like coaxing itself out of deep sleep. You do not rush this process. Your hands move to adjust the coarse tunic you slept in. The linen feels dry and cool against your skin. Looking down, you notice streaks of dirt smudged onto the creases of the cloth, reminders of the hasty settling that occurred yesterday. The weight of the bundled pack beside your sleeping spot is noticeable, a dull pressure against your hip. You turn slightly, allowing yourself a moment to observe the immediate surroundings of the makeshift camp. A scattering of rough-hewn wooden stalls and canvas coverings huddled together like nervous animals waiting for the sun. Even in this temporary, stark arrangement, there is a semblance of order. Some tent flaps are tied neatly back, others hang askew from hasty fastening. The first sounds to penetrate the quiet rhythm are not sharp noises, but murmurs, the soft, rhythmic calls that signal routine beginning. You can hear the distant splash and slosh of water being drawn from the communal well, a familiar sound that speaks less of urgency and more of eternal necessity. Following this watery cadence, you notice other sounds. The muffled clink of metal against wood, perhaps an implement being sharpened, or the gentle creak of wagon wheels on packed dirt. These ambient noises define the boundary between this strange encampment life and the steady pulse of your actual village, a contrast that seems particularly stark in the brightening air. You begin to walk towards the edge of the clearing, moving with measured steps designed to observe without being seen. Your path takes you alongside the low stone wall that marks where the rough camping ground finally gives way to cultivated earth and residential dwellings. The change is subtle but profound. Here, life has a deeper root, an established rhythm marked by enduring stone and persistent greenery. As you pass the small patch of garden bordering the lane, you catch the sweet, yeasty scent of baking bread mingling with the sharpness of fresh manure, a rich, complex smell that grounds you instantly in the reality of settled agricultural life. The village itself is stirring into its morning routine. You see women gathering near the wellhead, their hands moving with practiced economy as they fill skins and wooden buckets. Their movements are not hurried, suggesting a knowledge of their schedule. They know how long it will take to draw enough water for the household needs. Near them, an older man is carefully arranging stacks of firewood, lifting logs that look heavy despite his slow pace. He brushes crumbs from his trousers as he works, never seeming fatigued by the physical labor inherent in such a steady chore. You walk past these scenes, not observing them as exotic displays, but recognizing them as fundamentally reliable cycles, patterns repeated since before your own memory. The passage takes you further, towards the small merchant stall set up beneath an archway. The baker has already laid out his wares. Loaves dusted with flour and crusts golden in the strengthening light. He calls out a soft greeting that is more an acknowledgement than an advertisement, directing his voice toward those passing by. The wood of the stall feels cool under your fingertips as you brush past it. The scent of yeast and heat permeates the air, mixing pleasantly with the faint smell of sweat and damp wool that clings to you from your own preparations. You notice the men engaged in their morning commerce. Several are mending leather goods near a shaded patch of wall, straps, shoe soles, belts, the process methodical and quiet. The scraping sound of awls against cured hide provides a steady counterpoint to the natural sounds of the village waking up. You slow your pace by instinct, allowing yourself to simply watch these people existing in their routine. Their lives unfold before you with an effortless grace that seems impossible when viewed through the lens of sudden military deployment. There is a comfort in observing this persistent civilian rhythm, a quiet insistence on normalcy, despite the looming necessity of being prepared for conflict. The walk toward the designated muster point feels less like a journey and more like a deliberate slow drift along a threshold, the dividing line between an ordinary existence and the demanding structure of temporary service. You find yourself thinking about what makes this village so stable, how these people maintain such persistent normalcy despite the surrounding shadow of obligation you now carry. It is a quiet lesson in endurance, not the grand sweep of history, but the repetitive placement of a boot on packed dirt day after day that defines survival here. As you approach the wider clearing where all the assembled men are gathering, the atmosphere subtly shifts again. The personal warmth and organic chaos of the village give way to a more structured kind of order. Though still relatively peaceful, there is an undercurrent of expectation here, less visible than the damp chill, but present nonetheless. The ground beneath your feet transitions from uneven cobblestones and dirt paths into the flatter, compacted earth suitable for large groups. You walk with slightly greater care now. You are moving toward a space built to facilitate control, to accommodate formation. Pausing momentarily near the edge of the gathering area, you take in the details of what surrounds you. There are other men, scattered and loosely grouped, some leaning against barrels, some simply standing still, hands clasped or resting on their weapons. They appear settled into a kind of expectant inaction. You notice the variety of gear. Some polearms look freshly oiled, others show signs of wear and neglect. Certain belts hang low from heavy packs that suggest multiple days away from home. The material culture speaks volumes about both preparation and routine, the deep familiarity with weight, balance, and use. The initial moments here are spent in a kind of communal silence, punctuated by small sounds. The distant snort of an overworked horse, the soft jingle of metal fittings on harness gear, the steady crunching sound as someone kicks at stray straw. These subtle audio markers create a tapestry of gentle activity that serves to keep you observant and centered. The pace is determined by nothing external except the natural rhythm of human gathering. You let your gaze drift from face to face, studying the mix of alertness, mild boredom, and resigned acceptance on every man's expression. The sheer volume of people in one place, despite their quietude, creates a palpable density, a mixture of breath, clothing, and unspoken thought. This sense of being gathered together for a purpose that feels immense and distant forces your awareness inward. You find yourself observing the architecture of the gathering itself, the way the men arrange themselves into loose clusters, maintaining enough space to move, but not so much as to feel isolated. It is an enforced proximity that requires a careful management of personal boundaries. You continue toward the central muster point, and the routine begins in earnest, though it remains remarkably unhurried. There is no immediate clamor, only the slow, deliberate movement associated with organized waiting. You pass by men whose tasks are mechanical, checking knots on ropes, oiling joints on spears, running hands over strips of thick canvas awaiting stitching. These acts of maintenance are themselves a form of meditation, turning necessity into a temporary state of focused being. As you settle more deeply into the activity, your awareness lingers on the weight of expectation, not dramatic fear, but the quieter burden of duty and commitment. It is an intellectual acknowledgement that your life's routine has been temporarily placed second to this collective need for readiness. You feel the cool, slightly gritty air settling around you as the morning progresses through its initial light stages. The sunlight is strengthening now, hitting the dusty ground in bright patches, and creating sharp shadows beneath bundles of wood and men's feet. The persistent rhythms continue. A man coughs softly. Another adjusts his weight against a nearby polearm. The scent of horse sweat mixes with the smoke from tiny cooking fires that are just being lit. Each detail is absorbed slowly, weaving into the continuous narrative of this transitional day. You understand, quietly, that mere existence in this place, in this slow unfolding morning, is itself a form of preparation. The steadiness of the observation becomes as important to you as the physical readiness for any hypothetical march or drill. Throughout these passing moments, your focus remains gently anchored in the surrounding details, the subtle discoloration on a worn wooden stool, the patterned stain left by moisture drying on rough canvas, the way another man unconsciously rubs his forearm against the stiffened leather of his equipment. These tiny observations anchor you to the here and now, preventing the vast scope of war from feeling overwhelming or abstract. Instead, it reduces the concept to a series of tasks: oiled joints, folded cloth, placed boots, and continued breathing. The dust under your boots is fine, a reddish powder that has begun to settle into the skin of the earth. It smells faintly metallic, a scent mixed with wood smoke and sweat, scents that seem perpetually attached to this temporary place of gathering. You stand near the edge of the muster ground, allowing your eyes to adjust fully to the strengthened light of late morning. The air here is still cool, retaining the damp chill of the early hours, but there is a distinct warmth rising from the cluster of drying hides and stacked lumber nearby. This atmosphere is one of deep routine rather than immediate alarm. You notice the rhythm of the men moving around you. It is not rushed or frantic, but methodical. One man tests the length of his spear shaft against a low-hanging branch, tapping it softly until the wood makes a muffled thunk. Another checks the buckle on his belt with meticulous care, running a thumb over the worn iron until he understands its weak points and reliable strengths. You observe how easily these men slip into a state of practical concentration, focusing entirely on the small mechanical tasks at hand. Your attention drifts to a point just beyond the perimeter ropes. Several horses are being cooled by handlers. Their breath plumes softly in the cool air, creating ghostly wisps that dissipate quickly. You watch the handler's hands working over the leather girth, flexing the material with expertise. The smell of curing animal skin mixes strongly with the smoke, creating a dense, heavy backdrop sent to the morning's activities. This sense of accumulated smells, wood smoke mixed with earth and labor, is intensely real, grounding you in this unfamiliar patch of land. You find yourself absorbing the texture of your own clothing, the rough weave of the tunic against your forearm, the slight ache that has settled into your shoulders from the previous day's travel. It is a familiar discomfort now, oddly comforting in its predictability. A foreman, a man whose weight seems to carry an aura of quiet authority, moves slowly through the gathered group. He carries not a weapon, but a thick ledger bound in treated leather. His gait suggests that counting and verifying details are tasks requiring considerable mental stamina. You watch him pause before a small cluster of equipment piled near a wagon wheel, a set of iron fittings for shield straps, perhaps, or new spearheads. He doesn't speak loudly. His examination is conveyed through gesture, tapping an object with a knuckle, scrutinizing the joinery, nodding once in slow approval, and moving on to the next pile. This careful inventory feels far more significant than any grand parade of arms. It speaks instead to the sheer logistical weight of preparing people for a sustained absence from their usual lives. You feel the slight pressure of time passing, not with urgency, but with the slow, unavoidable drift, like smoke curling upwards into the bright sky. You lift your gaze from the ground and survey the arrangement of the tents. They are arranged in orderly rows, temporary shelters built of canvas stretched over poles, suggesting that this encampment is meant to endure for a period of time, not just a single night's rest. The repeated geometry of these canvas shapes suggests a forced order imposed upon the wilder landscape around you. As your eyes finally settle on the distant rise of woods, you consider the boundary between what is controlled, the camp, the gear, the ranks, and what remains untamed beyond it. It is a division that feels profound, making the methodical nature of the inspection even more stark. You observe another man struggling slightly to adjust his pack strap. He seems weighed down by something heavier than just its contents, perhaps the sheer bulk of expectation. He stops for a moment, breathing deeply, and then readjusts with a sigh that is mostly unnoticed by those around him. This small act of private fatigue resonates in your own chest, a shared exhaustion that underlies the veneer of martial alertness. You notice the quality of the light changing slightly now. The harsh edge of early morning sun has softened into a warmer glow, filtering through the upper canopy of trees at the camp's periphery. The shadows are lengthening and softening again, suggesting the slow movement towards midday. Your posture subtly shifts in response to this change, settling your weight more comfortably against the packed earth beneath your boots. You recall previous days when such gatherings were accompanied by fanfare or heightened tension. But today, the atmosphere is quieter, dominated by the sound of scraping metal on stone and the soft thuds of practice polearms being tested. It is a quiet education in preparation itself. This mechanical necessity seems to occupy all minds, filling even any momentary gaps with practical detail. As you stand, merely observing this sustained level of routine activity, you realize that the process of readiness is not an emotional outpouring. It is instead an exhaustive series of small checks and confirmations. Everything must be accounted for, every buckle, every splinter of wood, every man's steady breath, must confirm its presence before the next movement can begin. You watch a nearby woman, perhaps accompanying the men with provisions or necessary goods, gather a handful of stray straw from beneath an awning and methodically start to tie it together, braiding it into small, manageable bundles. Her focus is entirely on the repetitive motion of her fingers working through the dry stalks. This simple act of collecting trash shows a deep persistence, linking the mundane labor required for survival even in this strange military context. It is the contrast between her domestic task and the men's hard gear that feels most notable to you. Both are forms of necessary maintenance, one for the household, the other for the armed company. The air smells now of hot leather mixed with freshly cut herbs carried perhaps on the wind from a passing cart. You shift your feet slightly, feeling the grip of the earth beneath the soles, connecting yourself physically to this spot in time and space. The steady pulse of the camp life continues unabated, a slow, deep rhythm that is fundamentally unhurried, yet infinitely demanding. It teaches patience not through meditation alone, but through sustained observation of sheer routine. You allow your mind to drift back through the small movements you have witnessed. The careful tying of the rope, the checking of the harness leather, the systematic counting from the ledger. Each action, no matter how minor or repetitive, required an attention that was utterly focused and completely present. This feeling of necessary thoroughness becomes a gentle backdrop to your quiet waiting. The rhythm of your boots is the first thing that registers, a steady thudding pattern against the packed earth. It is not the frantic pace of a desperate rush, but something far more controlled, a measured cadence, like heartbeats timed for endurance. You feel the slight give beneath the soles of your worn shoes as you adjust your footfall to match the line ahead of you. Your comrades walk alongside or just slightly behind, and their movement creates an almost invisible counterrhythm that settles over you. This is not a drill in the modern sense. It is simply learning how to move together, hour after hour, day after day. You focus your attention downward first, tracing the edge of the dirt path with your eyes. The earth beneath your feet is composed of fine grit and small pebbles, mixed perhaps with decomposed leaves from trees that must have grown near this camp at some point. You notice how this ground, trampled by dozens of boots over many days, has settled into a dense, uniform texture, a sleep-deprived firmness underfoot. It requires effort to lift the weight of your foot and place it exactly where the last one did. The muscles in your calves begin to protest, not with sharp pain, but with a deep ache that pools low down in your shins. You feel the subtle stretching sensation as you lengthen your stride slightly before pulling it back into sync. This small physical complaint serves as a powerful reminder of the reality of the march. Endurance is accumulated through thousands of tiny adjustments. As you continue, the sensory input expands beyond the direct feeling of your feet. The air itself feels thick with scents, a mingling of unwashed wool and sweat from dozens of bodies moving in proximity. The faint, acrid smoke of recent cooking fires wafting on a slight breeze. And underneath it all, the clean, mineral smell of damp earth disturbed by movement. You observe the spacing between the men. There is no enforced closeness or sudden gap. Rather, there is a natural equilibrium achieved by everyone moving at the same deliberate pace. Each person maintains their own little bubble of space, yet they are nonetheless bound together by this shared, predictable rhythm. It suggests something quieter than discipline. It suggests habit. Your breath, which you had initially taken freely and deeply in your village home, begins to regulate itself into the marching pattern. You find yourself inhaling with a steady count, perhaps 4 counts, then exhaling equally slowly. This controlled respiration is not just for oxygen. It seems to be anchoring your mind to the immediate physical reality. When the body falls into a predictable rhythm, the restless parts of the mind often quiet down as well. You look out past the heads of the men walking in front of you, and notice how the morning light is filtering through the scattered trees beyond the camp perimeter. It is a golden gray illumination that lacks sharp edges, suggesting either early or late hour, though you feel the steady press of noon upon your back. The sunlight catches on the polished metal of some spear tips nearby, creating brief, fleeting flashes that disappear as quickly as they arrive. The slow act of marching becomes almost meditative. You begin to consider what this careful, repetitive movement means. For a man who has lived a life defined by cyclical seasons, the planting, the growing, the harvest, this imposed mechanical pace is strange. Yet there is an undeniable kind of comfort in its predictability. Life in your village had moments of intense labor or sudden emptiness. The march offers neither extremes. You think about the people waiting at the muster point. They are all engaged in this same slow process of becoming habituated to the sustained effort. Their faces, set in expressions of quiet concentration, bear no grand drama, only the focused attention on keeping pace. It is a profound human mechanism, turning raw physical strength into manageable routine. Occasionally, a slightly stronger man nearby will adjust his grip on his polearm or lift his head to check something over the intervening distance. These micro-pauses in the marching rhythm are natural punctuation marks. You notice how these small adjustments require momentary shifts in balance and focus. A slight tilt of the body, a minor shift of weight from one foot to the other. The sheer monotony of the movement forces your attention to linger on details you would normally overlook. The specific way a man's leather boot strap has frayed near the buckle, the way dust motes dance in the shafts of weak sunlight that penetrate the canopy, the almost imperceptible creaking sound coming from the wood of the wagon wheels parked just beyond the parade ground. As your legs continue their tireless work, you start to feel a subtle shift within yourself. The initial apprehension, the lingering questions about why you were here or what conflict might wait for you, begin to get buried under the sheer physical requirement of simply putting one foot in front of the other. Your thoughts become less abstract and more immediate. Water, ache, breath, count. You reflect briefly on the nature of learning this pace. It is not a matter of acquiring knowledge. It is a matter of acquiring habit. You are teaching your body how to function as a single, steady unit alongside others who are doing the same thing. This slow, synchronized movement builds trust with both your comrades and, perhaps more importantly, with yourself. The sun climbs higher now, and the gentle warmth begins to penetrate the upper layers of clothing you wear. It is not yet harsh heat, but a persistent, enveloping presence that warms the exposed skin on your neck and wrists. You breathe it in alongside the scent of sweat and wet wood smoke, accepting this temporary state of being carried by the disciplined rhythm. The steady sound of footsteps continues to wash over everything else. The distant clanging of metal, the hushed sounds of conversation, the stray calls of birds, and eventually that rhythmic thudding becomes the background score of your new reality. You continue marching, allowing the predictable weight and flow of movement to guide you further into the rhythm of the day. The cool, slightly acrid scent of oil and tanned hide hangs low in the air around the camp. It settles on your exposed skin, a mixed aroma that is distinctly temporary, unlike the yeasty smell of bread or the sharp, clean tang of river water back home. You find yourself settled near a rough table, positioned among other men who have all gathered for this midday lull. The sun, high now, casts light in sheets, illuminating the dust motes dancing above your work surface. You sit hunched slightly over the task before you, a length of worn leather strapping that needs patching. The process is quiet, almost ritualistic. You pull out a small kit, all needle, waxed thread, and the patches themselves. They are squares of dark hide, cured and stiffened by some forgotten process. The material feels brittle under your fingers, yet strong enough to bear weight. You begin by scraping away the frayed edges of the old strap with a small knife blade. The sound is a low, rhythmic skick-skick-skick against the worn surface of the wood, and the slight grating noise of metal on sinew. Each scrape requires patience, demanding concentration that quiets the usual internal hum of anxiety or anticipation. You watch the shaving curl off. It's almost transparent in the strong sunlight, proof of how quickly time wears away even something as seemingly permanent as cured animal skin. Across the way, a man with calloused hands is sharpening the edge of a simple iron blade. The rhythmic shing-shing of stone against steel provides a steady counterpoint to your own work. You can see the focused intensity in his posture, the subtle flexing of muscles in his forearms as he guides the whetstone back and forth. He does not look at you, nor do you look directly at him. You are simply observing the process itself, the dedication required for a simple act of refinement. When it comes to mending leather, you quickly learn that speed is less important than method. You scrape clean, mark the damage precisely, and then begin stitching. The needle passes through the layers in steady, deliberate arcs. You feel the slight give and resistance of the material beneath the point, a subtle tactile feedback loop that anchors your attention wholly to the now. This quiet communion with the craft is a strange comfort, especially when the purpose of this gathering seems so far removed from such small acts of detailed repair. You pause periodically to rest your elbow on your knee and simply watch your hands work. You notice how easily calluses have formed over the years, little ridges and hardened points that speak silently of decades spent handling tools, ropes, plow handles, or whatever labor defined a life outside this temporary military existence. These hands are capable, practical instruments designed for persistence. A gentleman nearby is testing a section of rope braided from natural fibers. He draws it taut between his fingers and wrist, flexing the tension until it resists completely. The smell emanating from the wet hemp is earthy, mingled with sweat and wood smoke. It suggests utility, a reliable link, strong enough to bind or hoist or perhaps even restrain. You think about how many different types of knots there are, each one speaking a little history to those who know its name. The sheet bend for crossing rivers, the figure 8 for safety, the simple square knot for joining lengths. The conversation does not burst into sudden bursts. It drifts like smoke. It starts quietly, concerned with basic necessities. One man mentions the quality of the dried forage on the edge of the camp. Another inquires about how far the main supply train was expected to come. These are questions that ground you immediately back into the reality of sustainable life, even when surrounded by men preparing for violence. You find yourself participating in a slow exchange with a man who speaks of his own village water wheel. He describes the predictable grind of wet stones and the steady lift of flour into sacks. You listen to the simple mathematics of his life, how consistent labor yielded necessary sustenance. It is a profound contrast to the concept of military provision, which feels unpredictable, subject to grand commands and distant logistics. The afternoon light shifts noticeably. The harsh glare mellows slightly, acquiring a dusty gold quality that catches the edges of tents and makes the dust suspended in the air seem luminous. You feel the slow creep of fatigue, not the acute exhaustion of labor, but the deep ache of sustained waiting and quiet vigilance. Your shoulders begin to bear the memory of the heavy pack you wore on previous days. You deliberately slow your stitching pace, allowing the rhythmic movements to become almost meditative. Each pass of the needle is a small moment of control in a life that feels overwhelmingly large and out of your personal jurisdiction. The simple act of mending this strap, making it whole again so it can bear weight once more, becomes an analogy for something else entirely. The need to keep oneself together, piece by careful piece, under the strain of unusual circumstances. When you finally finish a small run through the stitching pattern and feel the solid knot of satisfaction, you push back from the makeshift table. The movement is smooth, economical, not weary, but simply accepting of the body's need for change and position. You look up at the surrounding area, taking a moment to process the scene not as a place of impending conflict, but merely as an assembly point, a large, temporary collection of ordinary men waiting out the day. You walk slowly toward the edge of the muster ground, giving your eyes time to adjust from the focused proximity of your work to the wider expanse. The air here feels different. It has absorbed more of the natural elements, mixing wood smoke with the cooler scent of damp earth and wild grass just beyond the perimeter fencing. You notice a small grouping of wildflowers pushing up between two packed stones, yellow and purple hues that manage to thrive in harsh, discarded ground. Their resilience speaks volumes about life's ability to persist even when given the barest opportunity, much like the enduring rhythms you are trying to maintain right now amidst the organized routine of preparation. The methodical nature of these midday tasks, from patching leather to sharpening blades, acts as a kind of emotional regulator. They pull your focus away from the abstract concerns, the war, the unknown future, and tether it firmly back into the tangible world. The required tension on the thread, the specific grain of the hide, the coolness of the iron against your skin. You settle near the edge of the camp perimeter, finding a slightly cooler patch of shade cast by an overhanging awning. You do not plan to leave this spot for some time, simply absorbing the soundscape. The occasional lowing of livestock from a nearby farmstead mixes with the muted scrape of boots, creating a peculiar soundtrack of both domesticity and readiness. It is a strange blend of sounds that speaks only of human persistence, the need to feed, to maintain, and to wait out the long afternoon until the stars can take over. The hardness of the wooden trough against your forearms is a solid, undeniable feeling. You lean over it, rinsing the grime from the coarse, baked bread you have broken for yourself. The water in the basin is lukewarm, having been carried some distance before reaching this formation. It tastes faintly mineral, carrying the dust and dampness of the earth into every swallow you take. Around you, the action repeats itself with a soft efficiency. Several other men are bent over similar troughs or wooden boards, their focus narrowed down entirely to the act of eating. No one speaks much, not out of silence, but perhaps out of the simple necessity of conserving energy and maintaining the gentle rhythm of survival. You notice how the light from the midday sun catches the sheen on a piece of freshly cleaned iron cookware placed near another man's rations. It is a bright, utilitarian gleam against the dull, packed earth of the military area. You break off a piece of salted meat for yourself. The salt has drawn out a visible amount of moisture, leaving the surface slightly dry and intensely flavorful. You chew slowly, allowing the texture to register on your tongue. It is not the rich, complex flavor of fresh, slow-cooked fare that your village knows, but a sharp, potent burst designed for preservation and utility. It requires focus. This forced simplicity of food makes you notice the patterns around you. The way dust settles in corners, the arrangement of simple wooden stools, the careful stacking of empty earthenware bowls. The hard bread you bite into smells faintly of smoke from a distant cooking fire, mingled with the earthy scent of animal musk and stale sweat. You realize that this meal is not about pleasure or satisfaction. It is purely about caloric input, fueling the long hours ahead. This shared sustenance, distributed in organized lines on rough-hewn tables, creates a peculiar kind of intimacy. You are close enough to smell the other men's wool tunics and damp hair, but far enough apart that individual space is maintained, a blend of proximity and necessary distance. After finishing your piece of bread, you wipe your hands slowly on the rough cloth provided. The fabric scratches lightly against your skin, a slight irritation that grounds you instantly in the present moment. You look up from the trestle table to survey the men nearby. Each face is etched with a similar expression, quiet concentration. There are no grand speeches or overt emotional displays, only the methodical absorption of energy. You take a deep breath, noticing the air itself. It holds different scents now, the sharp, metallic whiff of wet leather being cleaned, overlaid with the comforting scent of wood smoke wafting from a nearby cooking hearth. This blend of smells defines your temporary life here, effort mixed with domesticity. The sounds are subtle and repetitive. The scraping sound as someone carves rations into smaller portions, the quiet clink of ceramic ware against wood, the soft, rhythmic swish of clothes moving as men shift in their seats. These small noises build a low, continuous humming layer over the camp that you find oddly soothing. It is the sound of competence, the steady function of people who are maintaining themselves despite the unfamiliar rigor. You notice how most of the men eat methodically. They do not devour their meals. They seem to incorporate them into a larger, slower process. Every chew seems deliberate, every swallow accounted for. This slow pace of eating, observed in formation, makes you consider the nature of routine itself. Life back home was full of unpredictable rhythms, the sudden urgency of harvest, the unexpected call of illness, the meandering ease of conversation. Here, life is regulated by bell-like schedules and mandatory formations, which paradoxically allows for a different kind of calm. As you finish your bowl of thin broth, you set it down gently. You observe the residue left on the wooden table, a mix of crumbs, smears of grease, and watermarks. The simplicity of this small act, clearing your plate, is an ingrained habit, regardless of whether the meal was luxurious or purely functional. You find yourself looking across the formation at a man who seems particularly still. He is watching his own hands as he finishes licking crumbs from the edge of his bread bowl. His movements are economical, nothing wasted. You reflect on the deep history embedded in this simple ritual of feeding. Human communities, regardless of their supposed purpose, whether building a wall or preparing for a siege, always center around the act of making and sharing sustenance. It is the oldest and simplest binding agreement. The midday sun begins its slow descent overhead, shifting the quality of the light into something less harsh. The shadows cast by the tents and temporary shelters lengthen, pulling out sharp, defined geometry across the packed earth. The shift in light encourages a subtle movement. Men begin to stand up from their low stools, stretching the backs and limbs that have been settled for hours. This slow transition from stationary consumption back into upright presence is marked only by gentle creaks of joints and sighs. You watch a younger man doing this, his joints protesting slightly with an audible groan. You feel a deep, empathetic connection to that simple physical discomfort, the stiffness after forced idleness mixed with controlled activity. It reminds you that even in the name of preparation for conflict, the body is still subject to the basic laws of exhaustion and maintenance. The communal eating area, now slowly emptying out, seems to absorb the lingering heat and scents. The smell of wood smoke mixes again with the more immediate scent of damp woolen cloth and stored rations. Everything here, the trestle tables, the simple bowls, the stacked crates, has been designed for maximum utility and minimum comfort. It is a space built purely around function. As you rise to your feet, feeling the residual ache in your lower back, you take one last look at the lines of men who shared this meal with you, strangers united by the same temporary geography. There is no grand emotional outburst, nothing dramatic to mark the departure from the meal, just a quiet acceptance that the sustenance has been taken and the cycle must continue. This enforced routine, this steady beat of necessity, it settles over you like a familiar, if unusual, blanket. You know that whatever comes next will follow the same pattern: movement, structured rest, maintenance, and another necessary intake of energy. You simply proceed with the rhythm. The afternoon light filters through the makeshift lean toss, a pale, dust-laden gold that seems to slow down time itself. You find yourself settled on a low wooden bench near the edge of the camp's central fire pit. The air, which had been crisp and brisk during your march across the packed earth earlier, now holds the deeper, smoky warmth of burning oak and pine knots. It is the hour when the purpose of the day seems to fold inward upon itself, becoming less about movement or readiness, and more simply about presence. You watch as the shadows lengthen from the fire's glow, stretching out like long fingers across the dry ground. An older man, perhaps an experienced scout or a village elder who has followed you into this temporary military structure, sits opposite you. He is not speaking yet. He simply gestures with his hands toward the deepening crepuscular hues outside the camp's edges. You feel the warmth of the wood beneath you, rough-hewn and seasoned, and notice how the fine grit of the surrounding earth has settled onto your trousers, a reminder that even here, surrounded by temporary structures, the ground remains irrevocably earthen. He finally begins to speak, his voice low and resonant, not meant to carry across any distance, but to settle into the quiet hollows of your hearing. He does not start with tales of valor or dramatic battles. Instead, he begins with whispers of local lineage, speaking about the cycles of the harvest, the migrations of birds that mark the changing seasons, and the old ways people used to live in this valley long before any organized legion marched through it. You sit and listen, your initial readiness for a story of martial glory fading away, replaced by a quieter curiosity. The details he shares are woven from memory and local folklore. How once, when the rivers swelled dramatically in spring, certain families knew precisely where to find dry ground and safe passage, what specific herbs grew only near running water that could ward off fever, or how the pattern of migrating swallows indicated months in advance whether a good rain would come. You become acutely aware of the continuity embedded in these tales. These are not stories invented for entertainment, but vessels holding knowledge, practical survival guides and philosophical reminders disguised as history. You observe your own hands, resting on your knees. They are strong enough to carry a shield or hold a spear point, yet they are also fingers that know how to gently handle the smooth, worn grip of an ancient farming tool. The weight of these dual realities, the man ready for conflict and the descendant of agrarian rhythm, settles around you like a damp cloak. As he speaks about the rhythms of planting and reaping, you start connecting the stories to your own life. You picture the scent of freshly turned soil, rich and sweet, contrasting sharply with the sharper, acrid smell of wood smoke that permeates the air now. The tales speak of the community's strength derived from predictable natural cycles. When the wheat would be strongest, how the river always kept its course after the autumn floods, and the quiet satisfaction of a successful, contained season. These are structures far more persistent than any temporary camp or military formation. They are built into the earth itself. At one point, he describes an old method of treating worn leather belts using rendered animal fat mixed with certain mineral clays, a process that requires patience and meticulous application. You feel the satisfying drag on your imagination as you mentally trace the action, scooping the thick, creamy mixture, carefully rubbing it into the grain until the dark hide revived to its deepest black. This detailed recollection of maintenance, of objects and life itself, is profoundly grounding. It pulls you out of the potential chaos of battle and anchors you firmly in the texture of routine upkeep. You note how his description forces your focus onto things that endure, resilient materials, established methods, predictable needs. You realize that these stories are fundamentally about resilience. They narrate survival through adaptation, how to build a life on this patch of earth regardless of who might march past or what transient threat might arrive. The grand sweep of history, as narrated by military commanders, feels distant compared to the intimate, moment-by-moment struggle for sustenance and community stability that he describes. You absorb the narrative not just with your ears, but through a deep slowing of your internal rhythm. The fire crackles softly nearby, providing a steady, reassuring counterpoint to his quiet voice. Each pop of burning wood is a small punctuation mark in the slow unfolding of history. You find yourself observing the men around you as well. Some are sketching maps in the dirt with sticks. Others are silently sharpening their blades, the rhythmic skingshing sound providing its own low soundtrack. Yet, even these highly specialized routines seem to be underscored by a sense of quiet waiting, a patience that acknowledges time's slow passage, whether measured by seasons or by the minutes until dusk fully settles. The conversation continues into memories of local festivals and shared meals, how the community would gather not for military display, but simply because the harvest had been successful enough to warrant a day of feasting and storytelling. These instances of voluntary gathering seem richer in humanity than any forced parade or structured inspection. You feel your shoulders relax almost imperceptibly. The tension that comes from constant vigilance eases slightly into a comfortable lethargy. You consider the sheer amount of knowledge being passed down, the intricate understanding of local topography, medicinal plants, and social obligations. This cumulative wisdom is not confined to any single person or age group. It flows like underground springs through generations. It represents a life lived in deep harmony with a specific place, a relationship far more profound than simply occupying ground for a season. As the light fades completely, leaving only the warm orange glow of the fire pit and the deeper shadows under the tents, you feel the weight of this accumulated knowledge settling upon your own mind. You are momentarily connected to this deep stream of history, finding a reflective counterpoint to the transient nature of your military presence here. The rhythm of breathing, the soft crackle of wood smoke mingling with the scent of earth and rendered fat, becomes the dominant song. You simply breathe in this quiet immersion, letting the old ways whisper into the temporary silence of the camp. The late afternoon sun begins its slow, deliberate descent. It is not the sharp, aggressive light of midday, but a softening glow, filtered through dust motes and the lingering haze of wood smoke. You find yourself settling into a rhythm that has been built moment by passing moment, the routine of decline. The hours spent in learning, mending, and listening have gathered together into this quieter period. You feel the day's energy draining out slowly from your limbs, replaced by a steady weariness that settles deep within the bones. Your attention naturally drifts to the camp perimeter. You notice how the long shadows begin to stretch out from the tents and the wooden structures scattered around the encampment. These shadows seem to absorb the light, deepening the greens and browns of the earth. They are not just an absence of sun. They possess a definite texture, feeling cooler and more profound than the brightly lit areas. The air itself undergoes a subtle transformation. The sharp, bright scents of midday, sweat mixed with pine tar and damp leather, begin to mingle with something richer, the cooling scent of packed earth and the faint, clean smell of approaching night. You inhale slowly, drawing in the mixture of decay and preparation. It is the smell of things settling down. You are being directed toward a specific post, a stretch of ground just outside the main camp activity area. This will be your station for the watch. The assignment feels less like an active duty and more like an extended period of stillness, a deep immersion into vigilance. You walk slowly towards the designated area, your boots crunching lightly on gravel mixed with dried grass clippings. Each step sounds distinct in the thinning air, marking out time as easily as any shouted command. As you reach your post, you pause to look around. The activity around the central fires is still present but significantly diminished. Men are settling into semi-rest, some leaning against trunks of wood, others sitting on upturned barrels, their postures adopting a relaxed gravity. There is no sudden surge of noise. Rather, it is a gradual deflation of sound, like air leaving a balloon. You examine the assigned wooden platform or post itself. It feels solid, built for endurance and patience. You test its stability with your hand, noting the smoothness of the worn wood where generations of hands have touched it. a contrast to the rougher edges of the newer, unfinished lumber nearby. The wood holds a slight coolness even in the fading warmth of the day. Taking up your designated place feels like drawing a boundary around yourself and this small patch of earth. It requires a conscious slowing down. You adjust your weight so that you are balanced but not rigidly braced. A watchful, comfortable stillness. This is not the readiness for an immediate sprint or shout. It is the quiet, sustained presence. Your mind begins to engage with the concept of watching. Watching does not require looking at anything specific, yet requires noticing everything at once. You begin running through mental checklists. Your belt buckle feels solid and secure. The weight of the weapon resting nearby seems perfectly balanced. Your breath evens out into a steady, almost meditative rhythm. You observe one man crossing in the distance, perhaps returning from the edge of the field. He moves with a tired gait, his shoulders slightly slumped. You watch the precise arc of his walk, the swing of his hips, the lift and place of his feet. This simple observation forces you to recalibrate your own stillness. To be truly present requires absorbing the details of movement without becoming consumed by them. The setting sun finally finds its peak in the western sky, casting a remarkable wash of orange and dusty purple light across the distant tree line. You do not look dramatically at the colors. Instead, you let the light simply fall over your skin and the fabric of your uniform. The warm hue seems to seep into your pores, momentarily masking the chill that is surely arriving. You are left with a wide vista before you, the camp nestled in the valley floor, surrounded by darkening fields and woods. You consider the immense simplicity of this task, to merely observe, and report what happens when nothing particularly remarkable happens. It is an exercise in sustained attention, far more taxing than any physical exertion. As the last vestiges of sunlight fail, a profound coolness begins to creep into the air, signaling that night's true guardianship must begin. The smell of wet dirt rises up as the surface temperature drops. You find your gaze shifting from the grand panorama to the details immediately around you. The small pockets of accumulated dust near your boots, the way the shadows pool thickly beneath the eaves of a nearby tent, and the specific pattern where grass blades meet trampled earth. You allow yourself a moment of quiet reflection on what this routine means. You have spent days preparing for potential conflict, for drills, for rations, for instructions. But in this moment, all that preparation dissolves into the deep necessity of watchfulness. The purpose is stripped down to its fundamental requirement, being there. To be reliable when others might fail to notice a subtle shift, a flicker of light, or an unusual silence. This transition from structured day activity to unburdened vigilance changes the character of your breathing. It slows further, becoming almost imperceptible. You root yourself into the spot, feeling the rough texture of the wooden platform beneath your weight, grounding yourself in the physicality of this quiet assignment. The world around you is exhaling its day. You are simply waiting for it to exhale entirely. The day's forced routine has finally eased into the vast expanse of night. You remain awake, not out of alarm or command, but simply because the natural ebb of energy has taken hold, leaving you in a state of profound quietude. The air that settles around the camp is different now. It carries a coolness that seems to penetrate straight through your layers of wool and leather, drawing out the residue warmth of the spent day. You shift slightly on your bedroll, feeling the rough texture of the canvas beneath your cheek, noticing how every minuscule change in position brings with it a faint whisper of movement against the damp ground. The camp is vast when the sunlight is removed. During the day, human activity tends to compress and define space. Piles of wood, organized gear, clear pathways worn into the dirt. But under the cover of deep twilight, these lines blur. The boundaries that were so solid during the hours of duty seem to soften at the edges, dissolving back into the surrounding field. You notice a faint smell now, mixed with the familiar scent of damp earth and wood smoke, but it is overlaid by something else. The clean, cold musk of open night. It smells like stillness itself. You adjust your position again, resting your elbow on your knee for a moment, simply to let your muscles forget the held tension of the day's watch. The sounds that register now are not the sharp shouts or repetitive calls of the camp, but ambient noises. The low, rhythmic clatter from somewhere distant, perhaps a cart wheel slowly rolling over uneven ground. The soft, drawn-out baa of an ewe belonging to a nearby farmstead. And most noticeable of all, the occasional, echoing whimper of a dog that is searching for its master in the growing darkness. The sounds arrive without warning, just as quietly as they pass. There are no sudden bursts, only slow accretion. You become accustomed to listening not for anything particular, but simply for the pattern of silence itself. You realize how much energy was spent throughout the day monitoring potential threats or required vigilance, and now that necessity has cooled into simple observation. It is an exhausting kind of rest. You let your gaze drift upward, although you cannot yet make out distinct stars against the deepening gloom. The sky above the open camp space seems immense, a depth of color that changes from bruised purple near the horizon to a deepening slate gray directly overhead. If you focus just your peripheral vision on that expanse, you can feel its cold distance pressing down upon the earth below. The human sounds are comforting in their mundanity. There is a steady creaking noise coming from several tents nearby. The shifting tension of canvas poles as the air cools and contracts around them. Occasionally, a muffled cough breaks the quiet, or perhaps the gentle scuffling sound of someone shifting weight on straw bedding inside an adjacent shelter. These tiny sounds are proof that life continues in its slow, uninterrupted cycle, undisturbed by your temporary arrangement of military order. You think briefly about how the world functions when no one is looking. The camp exists only through highly structured, sustained effort. Wood piled high for fire, gear checked repeatedly, men positioned for watch duty. But without those conscious efforts, the place simply folds back into a gathering of canvas and dirt, waiting patiently for the rising sun to impose order once more. The scent profile remains interesting. Beneath the dampness and smoke, there is the faintest trace of something sweet, almost earthy, perhaps from wild herbs growing nearby or carried on the cool breeze from some unknown field beyond the camp perimeter. It suggests life in abundance, existing indifferent to human encampment or temporary duty. You take a slow breath, letting it expand your chest fully, and then releasing it with controlled slowness. This deliberate act of breathing becomes its own meditation, separating you further from the rush of action that define the day. Each inhale draws in the coolness of the night. Every exhale seems to carry away a small measure of tension accumulated over hours of watchful waiting. The natural light gradient continues to descend, moving past visible twilight and into true nocturnal obscurity. The stars are still elusive, hidden by atmospheric moisture and perhaps too much localized smoke. However, you feel them, more than see them. You sense the immense, cool weight of that celestial dome arching over your small military gathering. It is a profound connection to something unimaginably old and stable. You remain settled in this state of observant stillness, allowing your awareness to spread outward from your immediate self. You observe the shadows created by the nearest flickering campfire, the way they dance and distort on the rough ground near the rations pile. These dancing shapes are temporary geometry, constantly reforming themselves as the fire subtly consumes its fuel. They remind you that even stability is merely a function of sustained attention, while change is simply inevitable. There is no immediate agenda. There is nothing required of you but to exist quietly within this moment. This quietude acts like a deep pool, reflecting all the peripheral details. The faint gleam of moisture on a polished wooden pole, the muted scrape of a boot heel against packed clay, the distant sighing sound that might be wind passing through a tent flap or something entirely else. You learn to integrate these varied sensory inputs into one seamless backdrop, accepting them as simply the texture of this particular night in this temporary place. The quiet hours after sundown settle over you like a heavy, cooling blanket, wrapping around the routine and anchoring you to the profound, simple rhythm of being present. You are settled now, lying back upon the rough bedroll, the thin layer of woven straw offering minimal comfort against the damp ground. The cool night air seems to press in gently around you, carrying faint scents that blend together. The lingering wood smoke from earlier campfires, the earthy smell of churned soil, and something subtly sweet, perhaps the residue of boiled stew mixed with the scent of sweat-dampened wool. You do not need to look up to know where the vast expanse of sky lies. It is simply present, a limitless dome pressing down on the temporary chaos of men and gear around you. All the structures of your day, the marching, the mending, the eating, have receded into the deep quietude of night. The silence here is not an absence of sound, but a chorus of softer noises. The distant, rhythmic breaths of sleeping men scattered around your small space, the occasional soft creak as the canvas tent adjusts to the slight shift in temperature, the almost imperceptible whispers of the nocturnal wind moving through scrub brush just outside the perimeter. You wait for your eyes to adjust fully. The darkness here is profound, a rich velvet that seems to hold every stray point of light it can find. It takes time for the human eye to transition from observing the small contours near the ground, the upturned faces of mud, the patterns of dust disturbed by boots, to accepting the sheer scale overhead. The initial focus must be on breathing. You regulate your breath, making it deep and slow, a rhythm that seems to match the timeless cadence of the night itself. This methodical act of centering grounds you in the moment, reminding you that for this single span of minutes, there is nothing required of you but stillness. When your vision finally accepts the immensity above, your gaze slowly lifts. It does not fall upon a ceiling or an enclosed dome, but upon pure vacuum studded with light. You are seeing the heavens as they should be seen, away from the soot-stained air and the blinding illumination of clustered village life. The sheer weight of the visible sky is arresting. It seems to move slowly over millennia, indifferent to your temporary encampment or the purpose for which you gathered here today. The constellations are spread out like intricate patterns etched by some masterful hand, yet they feel utterly natural, as if painted there since time began. You trace the familiar lines of the beasts, the great hunter, perhaps, or the bear that sleeps in winter. You observe how these patterns appear to rotate, shifting subtly over the hours, a slow cosmic turning against which all human urgency feels remarkably small. The Milky Way, more than any single constellation, dominates your view. It is not just light. It is a visible wash of ancient dust and stellar remnants, a river of diamonds spread across black silk. Lying here, under this immense celestial tapestry, the transient nature of human affairs becomes palpable. Your duty to the camp, the temporary bonds of military life, feel like a small, fragile event tucked away beneath the unblinking permanence of these distant fires. You consider how many generations have lain gazing at these exact stars from similar vantage points. generations that lived and died in locations far removed from this immediate patch of trampled earth. There is no grand narrative unfolding among the constellations. There are merely lights, burning hydrogen and helium across unimaginable gulfs of space. This fundamental truth settles over you like a calming weight. The stars do not care about battle victories or defeats. They simply follow their predictable, sublime orbits. They continue regardless of human history. You turn your attention slightly from the grand patterns to the nearest source of light, the few brightest pinpricks that seem closest to your latitude. You notice how different magnitudes appear. Some stars burn with a fierce, almost blinding white intensity, while others are merely subtle smudges of pale yellow or hesitant blue. This variation speaks not only of distance, but also of inherent energy, a steady and persistent emanation. You watch the occasional plume of meteors streak across the deep blackness, brief fiery scars that cross the perfect pattern before vanishing without trace. They remind you of transience, too, flashes of light consumed by the emptiness, yet following an unseen celestial path. The feeling is one of profound historical connectedness. You are not simply a man resting in a camp on this specific night. You are a temporary nexus point connecting human life, with all its routines, dramas, and brief moments of sleep, to a pattern that predates civilization itself. This connection offers a strange, humbling sense of peace. You can smell the air now again, clearer than before. The cold has become an integrated part of your skin, a constant reminder of natural law. You breathe it in slowly, a mix of chilled night dew and distant campfire smoke. It is clean, sharp, purifying. Your mind wanders through the cycles implied by the stars. There is the cycle of day giving way to night, which gives way to dawn, the turning of the seasons, marked by constellations rising at different times, and the endless rotation around predictable points. Life itself feels mapped onto this celestial clockwork. The weight that usually sits in your chest, a vague tension related to duty or expectation, softens. It seems insignificant when measured against the slow, steady burn of light years away. The military purpose, too temporary, too localized, loses some of its sharp edges under the watchful gaze of eternity. You let the cosmic rhythm dictate your breathing. Inhale, you are here. Exhale, you are suspended in a moment that defies linear time. The man sleeping beside you will wake and start his mundane routines. The soldier on guard watch will continue his vigilance. But above them all, the celestial mechanism turns with flawless grace. It is this enduring pattern, this reliable grandeur, that becomes the deepest point of contemplation. Your thoughts move from the immediate material world, the rough wool beneath you, the ache in your shoulders, outward, until they meet the cold, magnificent vacuum overhead. The stars are a quiet teacher, reminding you that life's most profound certainties often operate without fanfare, requiring only patience and an open sky to be observed. You perform the final, quiet rituals of the day. It is not a grand or dramatic act. Rather, it is the steady, predictable rhythm of things needing tending to before stillness arrives. You kneel beside your bedroll, which is spread upon rough ground and marked by years of use. The straw beneath you retains a deep chill from the earth, a coolness that promises rest but carries with it the faint ghost scent of animal bedding. You begin methodically cleaning your gear. Your wooden polearm feels reassuringly heavy in your hands as you wipe the blade clean of any dried grime or lingering dust particles. You trace the oiled wood of the haft, feeling its subtle imperfections under your fingertips, the slight swelling where the grain shifted, the smooth patch worn down by decades of handling. The process is slow, deliberate work. You feel the familiar, comforting scent of rendered tallow mixed with old cedar oil, a smell that smells as much like survival and routine as it does like cleaning fluid. The weight of your pack suddenly seems less significant in this soft light. It was a burden during the march, a constraint when standing at attention. Now, viewed through the quiet lens of winding down, it is simply material: sacks, straps, flint, and steel. You check the securing knots on your leather pouches, tugging gently on each one until you are certain they hold fast enough to endure another day's rough treatment, but not so tightly that they pinch circulation into numbness. You observe the other men nearby performing their own quiet maintenance. Some scrape dried mud from their boots with a piece of scavenged slate. Others silently inspect the rivets on their leather jerkins, running thumbs over metal seams worn slightly dull by time and grit. There is no visible hurry among them, just this pervasive, patient rhythm of repair that suggests enduring continuity. The labor of keeping things whole seems almost as deeply ingrained in the community as the cycle of planting and harvesting. As you adjust the straps on your simple tunic, letting the rough wool settle over your shoulders, you notice how the moonlight catches the droplets of residual moisture still clinging to the canvas tarpaulin pitched nearby. They glitter briefly before falling away into the dry dirt, making a minute, barely audible patter that seems unusually loud in the deep quietude. You pause and focus on that sound, the drip, drip patter. It is a small, insignificant noise, yet it acts like a tiny anchor, drawing your attention back to the immediacy of the present moment. The chill air moves around you now, carrying with it faint smells. Wood smoke cooling down into mineral earth smells, damp wool, and something faintly acrid from the campfire embers that slowly die out. You draw in several deep, slow breaths, letting the cool night air wash over your lungs, a rhythm of inhale and exhale that feels instinctively steadying. This breath regulation seems to be more essential than any military drill you have practiced. It is the true mechanism for sustaining wakefulness through exhaustion. You then turn your attention to your companion, perhaps only yards away in his own simple space. You do not speak anything necessary or urgent. Instead, you simply make a slow passing gesture with your eyes, a shared acknowledgement of proximity and mutual experience. His presence is a kind of quiet ballast against the immensity of the night sky overhead. There are no grand farewells needed here, only this quiet acceptance of temporary cohabitation. A few words pass between you, if any, perhaps an inquiry about the state of his back after yesterday's march, or a simple remark on how crisp the air feels tonight. The conversation is weighted with shared history, the last 24 hours spent together in close proximity and controlled routines, and it does not require flourish or wit. It simply exists to confirm you are both still here, still breathing. The surrounding sounds become more apparent as your focus softens. There is the occasional muffled sound of a dog barking somewhere far beyond the perimeter of the camp, a loose creak from a tent pole settling under its own weight, perhaps the faint whisper of wind brushing against some piece of dried cloth hanging on a stake. These sounds are merely background texture, components of the great, continuous composition of the late night. You carefully brush the dust motes and debris off your bedroll bedding, tucking the corners beneath the straw to keep the morning dew from collecting too heavily. You make sure that everything is placed exactly where it belongs, the spear leaning against its notch, the kettle resting beside the embers, the communal pot covered with a piece of salvaged hide. This act of organizing chaos into temporary order feels profoundly satisfying, a small victory over entropy. Lying down now, you feel the scratchy roughness of the woven blanket against your skin. You lay your hands flat and still upon the bedroll. The immediate sensation is one of sinking, of gradual surrender to gravity and fatigue. Your muscles, which were taught to remain taut and ready for sudden movement throughout the day, begin slowly releasing their tension, finding a deep, unpracticed ease. Your thoughts slow, following the rhythm established by your breathing. You mentally catalog the sensations, the lingering scent of wood smoke mixed with cold dew, the occasional distant murmur of voices that have already drifted into sleep, the feeling of the rough wool against your neck. These details are not distractions. They are the solid facts of reality right now. They ground you in this specific place at this particular moment. The experience of preparing for rest becomes less about physical action and more about a sustained state of mental calm. You let go of the planning for tomorrow, letting it float away with the faint scent carried on the night wind. The concerns of survival, the weight of armament, they recede into an unconscious background hum. All that remains is the quiet reality of your body settling in, preparing to meet the steady necessity of sleep. Sleep feels less like a cessation of life and more like a kind of profound suspension, a necessary withdrawal into oneself before the cycle begins again at dawn. The world settles around you in a deep, humming silence. You lie on the rough bedroll, feeling the cool dip of the night air through the layers of woolen blanket and canvas tent flap. It is not quite sleep yet. Rather, it is that profound state of waiting, where consciousness seems to suspend itself between wakefulness and dream. Your senses begin to perform a careful inventory of the sounds around you, each one distinct, gentle, and perfectly ordinary for this place. You listen first to your own breathing. It settles into a measured rhythm, a slow in, a long out. You notice how deep breaths feel when they come naturally, without effort, carrying the subtle scent of stale wood smoke and clean linen. This pattern is grounding, an internal metronome marking time that seems endless. Next, you begin to register the collective quietude of the camp. It is filled with the tapestry of hundreds of separate, individual respirations. A soft snore drifts from a neighboring tent, punctuated by a sudden, brief expulsion of air that makes your shoulders twitch slightly in sympathy. There is another sound, very distant, like the low groan of stressed wood, perhaps an old cartwheel settling down, or merely the shifting weight of the ground itself cooling over the day's heat. You adjust your position slightly, testing the straw padding beneath you. The material is scratchy and uneven, a stark contrast to the softness of your own bed in the village. You draw one knee up toward your chest, simply to change the pressure points on your hips, feeling the slight friction of your woolen tunic against your skin. The sounds pick up subtly now that the main activity has ceased. There is the faint, rhythmic thump hush coming from further away, perhaps a sentry pacing out a slow guard beat near the outer edge. It does not sound like an alarm. It is merely a steady presence, a biological marker keeping watch over the slumbering settlement. You become acutely aware of temperature. The chill of the night air, which had seemed mild hours ago, now permeates everything. The damp earth beneath the tent stakes, the cold metal handle of your polearm lying beside you, even the edges of your own exposed skin. You pull the rough blanket higher around your neck, not because you are cold enough to shiver, but simply because the gesture feels comforting and complete. The smell profile shifts with the deepening darkness. The pervasive scent of wood smoke, which had dominated the daytime hours near cooking fires, begins to thin out and mix with something else. The mineral tang of dew settling on grass outside the perimeter, overlaid by a faint, almost sweet musk that must come from drying sweat mixed with cheap soap used earlier in the week. It is the unique scent of temporary human habitation, a blend of labor, earth, and wood. You allow your awareness to drift outward again, beyond the immediate confines of the tent flap. The camp seems to breathe slowly, a vast, interconnected organism resting after a long day of unnatural alertness. You realize how much you had focused on the mechanics of preparation this week, the sharp skick of steel on whetstone, the methodical tightening of leather straps, the steady placement of boots during your slow march. These acts required an intense focus that was almost tiring in itself. Now, in this period of enforced rest, all that careful attention simply dissolves. You settle back down against the damp canvas wall, letting the tension drain out of your shoulders and neck. The sounds continue to wash over you, a soft, wet cough nearby, the occasional shift in weight from an unseen companion who has settled deeply into sleep, the whisper of wind catching loose fabric. You reflect on the nature of this waiting. It is not the anticipation of conflict. That energy was expended earlier today, buried beneath layers of discipline and routine. This waiting is deeper. It is the quiet pause in the grand cycle of existence itself. You are simply existing within a shared breath with strangers who share nothing but temporary proximity. The history that surrounds you feels immensely deep and slow, far slower than the quick passing moments of battle, or even the day's routine camp duties. This stillness reminds you of the centuries before the need for men to gather like this, the time when life was dictated by the sun's rise and setting, not by muster rolls and tactical placements. You close your eyes fully now. The sounds do not vanish. They merely become background texture, weaving themselves into a constant, gentle hum. You imagine the world outside the camp, miles away, where men are sleeping in their own beds of straw and family life continues its unhurried cycle, where the primary concern is often the careful turn of soil or the reliable flow of water from the creek. This deep quietude becomes a physical experience. Your muscles relax completely, sinking into the cot's resistance. You notice how your mind begins to drift away from the military context, the ranks, the discipline, the purpose of service. Instead, thoughts drift back towards simpler geometries, the curve of a riverbank, the pattern of frost crystals on pane glass, the predictable arc of smoke rising straight up through the cold night air. The quiet is not empty, it is full. It is full of shared humanity, of necessary rest, and of the immense weight of undisturbed time passing above you, visible only to those who are still enough to notice. You breathe in this profound stillness, accepting it as a kind of